What's going on, everyone? We hope you had a great, relaxing, happy weekend, and it's now about that time to get right back into the market. On Friday, about 59% of the S&P 500 closed up in the green, but it isn't all what you might think. We can see there are a handful of major stocks out there like Apple, Nvidia, AVGO, Meta, and other ones that are definitely starting to move in some pretty crazy ways. This is happening as the market is currently in the middle of one of its strongest uptrends since the great financial crisis, but at the same time, we are coming into a specific part of the year that tends to be extra weak for the market. And on top of that, we are starting to see some insiders at Nvidia sell a good amount of their shares. So we have a lot to talk about for today, and I think we're set for a pretty exciting week. So, Tom, let's jump right into it.
Yeah, like you said, some Nvidia insiders are selling their shares, and Nvidia was down 3.2% on Friday. That is not the move that people want to be seeing here in the short term, although it is creating a lot of volatility, right? Like if we look at the market on Friday, the SPY itself was pretty flat. Like there wasn't really too many opportunities, but you go back to the heat map and you can see that there were opportunities out there, whether you're playing Microsoft or Google to the upside, or whether you were looking at Nvidia or Apple down. You know, there was definitely that fairly good movement in the market, and even some of these stocks that don't usually move, like McDonald's, was actually up like 2% on Friday, which I found very interesting. But nonetheless, Mike, it was a pretty negative week, I'd say, for the stock market last week. Like, sure, on on Friday, we did close higher than we opened on Monday, right? So it was a green week, but it still is something that you don't want to be seeing whenever you see the negativity that came in on Thursday and Friday. Those were two pretty big, massive sell-offs, especially that gap down Thursday heading into Friday. So for next week, I'm going to keep these supports on watch, like 543, and continue to watch the SPY very, very closely in the short term and these big tech stocks, which are going to influence the SPY's price action.
I guess we could say they were big sell-offs relative to what we've been seeing over this past year. It has been such an explosive year, so much so that the market has currently gone 377 days without a 2.05% sell-off or more. So I thought this was kind of funny because we could see that they're not just using a 2% sell-off as the classifier. It's 2.05%, which is the first time I've seen, someone like CNBC use this. But regardless, the market just hasn't really had a major pullback in a long time. Like the great financial crisis goes all the way back to 2008. And, again, it has been the longest streak since then that we've had without a 2.05% sell-off or more. So I think that says a lot. And at the same time, we are coming into that part of the month, towards the end of June, where the market does tend to get weaker than it usually is. Like we've been showing this chart, like at least over the past week or so, when you go all the way back to 1950, you could see that, this time of the month tends to get relatively weak. It doesn't mean it's the end of the world by any means, but it is worth noting that, hey, most of the time the market is weaker than normal. So I think it's important to, one, be aware of this data, but also adjust for it, in your trading, because as we all know, the stock market is, of course, always changing. And, if you don't adapt with it, then that'll cause some pretty big problems down the line. But either way, the bull run is still in full effect, but just be careful of some of these warning signs.
Yeah, that is a pretty big warning sign, Mike, and I know that one of the big warning signs in the short term has been Nvidia, right? A lot of people are getting a little worried. I know that it hit new all-time highs last week, and that was awesome, but the pullback that happened wasn't very awesome, right? Like that was a massive pullback right after it gapped up to 141 and then fell all the way back down, hitting lows around 125 last week with Nvidia. So I hate to see that, Mike, and I think people are starting to get a little bit scared here in the short term. We're starting to see a lot of negative articles about Nvidia in the short term, as well as just insiders selling shares, right? And whenever you see headlines saying that insiders cash in on a rally and they sell $700 million worth of shares, that's never the best headline to see, right? Especially whenever you're looking at these stocks to the upside in the short term. So I don't know, it's very interesting to see insiders selling this many Nvidia shares. And I don't know, 770,000 shares have been unloaded already this year. That's pretty crazy for the first 6 months.
Exactly, and it's the greatest amount since the beginning of 2023, which says a lot. And even when you go to like Open Insider, you can even see more specifically some of the insiders who are selling, which is including their CEO. But when you look at, let's say, insider sales, it makes sense. And when you work at a company like Nvidia for however long, and you have your stock rally to the extent that Nvidia did, you can't blame these people for locking in some of their gains and just cashing in off this rally. And just because they're selling, it doesn't mean it's the end of the world and anything like that. But it is worth noting, and it's even more important to think about how it affects sentiment. Like, Nvidia is a stock right now that has just been exploding in a mind-blowing way for years at this point, and everyone is pretty much euphoric about them. But understand that, in the same way that Nvidia stock has rocketed to the upside, you also have to expect pullbacks along the way, because over the past year, the uptrend has been especially great, where I think some people who are trading this stock kind of treat it in a way as if it could never pull back, when in reality, pullbacks are guaranteed to happen, and they're actually a good thing, assuming you believe in the company for the long term. So I would say no matter what, whether you're bullish on Nvidia, you're bearish, or you have no opinion, you have to, be willing to adapt, and even more specifically, understand that if you are in this company, you have to be prepared for a pullback, because just like we saw in like 2020 and 2021 with Tesla and a handful of other stocks, some people got so caught up in, like, let's say the story behind the stock, where it's like some people weren't willing or able to handle the pullback that did end up happening for Tesla. Like, when you look at a longer term chart of Tesla, after all of its splits, it hit highs of around $413 a share, but after it hit those highs, it came all the way down to around $100 a share in, like, you could say the end of 2022. There were a lot of people between the high point and the low point right there that just sold out, even though those people were the same people who were loving Tesla when it was going from $300 a share up to $400. So just keep in mind, pullbacks are normal, expected, and they're just how the market works. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, I love going back and looking at the Tesla example. That's a really good one. Whenever you see how much Tesla went up and how euphoric it got in the short term, people really thought that Tesla would never have the pullback that it did. And the way that it pulled back from 400 to 100 was no joke either. It's not like it took, 5 years for it to fall, right? It was like 1 year and pretty quick too, whenever you look at it in the grand scheme of things. So that's very interesting, Mike. And I know that Nvidia is just a very hot topic, and insider selling shares is a big deal. And also Nvidia, I thought this was kind of funny. They're actually back to third on the market cap list. With that drop on Friday, they fell down 3.2%. Now Apple and Microsoft are right back ahead. It's like these three stocks are having a war for first place here.
I was just gonna say that, and it changes every day who's in the lead, but yeah, that's pretty interesting. And when you look at Nvidia, and as we were talking about with pullbacks, at least for myself, I'm not saying that Nvidia is gonna pull back from $126 a share all the way down to 30. But at the same time, it's not unrealistic to expect a pullback at some point. And it just so, looks like, based off the price action in the short term, that, Nvidia is seeing more selling pressure than it has had in a while. So keep that in mind, and keep in mind that there's also opportunities in both directions. Like, you could love Nvidia for the long term, but at the same time, you might be someone who plays puts in the short term to capitalize off of a short term imbalance or anything like that. So regardless, being adaptable is what can put you in the best position. But yeah, Nvidia's volatility has definitely been crazy lately, and I'm pretty excited for this week.
Yeah, me too, Mike. And, one big thing with these stocks starting to fall down, I know you mentioned volatility. I can't help but go back to the VIX for a second. If we look at the daily chart, VIX is still bouncing around on that support around 12, and I'm curious, right? The market started pulling back a little last week. If we start to see it pull back more, VIX should start to shoot up quite a bit, maybe towards like $14 or $15 here in the short term, like it did a few weeks ago towards the end of May. So I'm definitely going to keep the VIX on the radar with everything negative going on with the market, right? And just because the market's negative or the market's red, that doesn't mean the VIX has to pop, but it's definitely something that happens quite often, usually when the market does fall. And you can usually catch some pretty good gains, whether you're looking at VIX or UVXY.
Alrighty, sounds good. So, Tom, I know this week isn't all that crazy in terms of earnings, but what's on the schedule?
Yeah, the earnings is actually pretty big. So we do have Carnival Cruise Lines kicking things off on Tuesday. That's a pretty big stock there. And then FedEx in after hours Tuesday. So I really like Tuesday there with those two reporting. Wednesday, though, we're going to see Micron report, a pretty big chip stock. So watch ticker symbol MU on Wednesday. And then we do have WBA or Walgreens and then Nike on Thursday. So not the biggest week for earnings, but still pretty respectable here.
Yeah, true. So it's definitely not the biggest, but like you mentioned, there are a handful of companies that should have some pretty decent moves. Out of all of them, I'll say I'm probably most excited for Micron, which will be Wednesday after close. You know, they're in the semiconductor industry, and they're also one of those stocks that has been rallying in a pretty strong way over the past couple months. So I think that one will be pretty interesting. But also Walgreens, ticker symbol WBA. This stock has been beaten down in such a major way, and it's kind of like at like a crucial point right now, right around this $15 support, where it's like you're gonna hope and pray that it finally sees some daylight and moves higher. But at the same time, this company has just been, you could say, dropping the ball for a couple years now, and it's quite literally at the same price the stock was at in like 1997. So it's been pretty rough for this one.
Yeah, that's terrible, right? To say that a stock is at a price it hasn't been at since 1997. That's so weird to say, and there's been a couple that I've been looking at like that. But yeah, WBA will definitely be on the radar with earnings coming up. Micron, like you said, will probably be the biggest one in my opinion too. And then switching over to the economic calendar, Mike, we do have a little bit this week. If we see on Tuesday here, there is some Fed speakers there. And then Wednesday, we have some new home sales. Thursday, there's durable good orders. And then the GDP growth rate, that's going to be a pretty big report there Thursday. And then Friday, we do have the PCE data coming out then, and we will talk about that as the end of the week gets nearer. But looks like right now for the beginning of the week, Mike, mainly we just have to worry about the earnings here, which is a good sign, especially with the price action we had on Friday.
There we go. All right, well, let's get right into some setups and predictions for tomorrow. A stock I'm watching pretty closely right now is ALNY. This was a recent big money trade, and we could see that it's moving in a stronger and stronger way in the short term. The stock right now is at $165 a share. We can see that we highlighted a big money trade on this one on March 22nd, and it was like a $13 million trade, which is pretty big. So I'm definitely looking at ALNY in a bullish way, and this one isn't just for tomorrow. We can see the expiration for this big money play goes all the way out to September, but basically this stock is definitely on my radar to the upside in the short term. In a perfect world, the big money expiration would be ideal, but the price action has just been getting better and better.
It really has. ALNY has been consolidating for a while, but it's good to see it come up now and start to really break out of that bottom range. That support's looking great in the short term. With my first play, I'm looking at McDonald's, and this is a bit of a slower stock, but on Friday, it started moving pretty well. It's actually also bouncing off a key support. So I'm going to keep watching this one up. It just hit $250. And if it starts to break above like 262 come Monday morning, then I will look at it up still. But I'm definitely going to be watching this one to the upside this week. Maybe not just for Monday, but as a week overall, I definitely like it. And it has these pretty good moves around open. So keep your eyes on McDonald's. But just keep in mind, if it goes flat, yeah, you're going to have to kind of pick and choose this one, right? Like, you really want to catch some good momentum on this one because it can have those days where it just does nothing.
All right, sounds good. Another stock I'm watching pretty closely is Goldman Sachs, so GS. This stock had a pretty decent red day on Friday, and the stock has been downtrending over like the past couple weeks. Looking at this stock, I like the risk reward to the downside. We can see right now it's at that $450 level, and I think it has a realistic chance to test that 440 area. And if the stock, let's say, were to break above, like, let's say the 454 to 455 area, that could kind of be where like the stop loss is at. But looking at GS in the short term, the price action has been mostly bearish, and the trend has been pretty consistent as well. And also, we are just seeing a little bit more weakness in the market as a whole, so this can kind of act as a hedge play here. But either way, I'm looking at GS in a bearish way in the short term. Again, I'd like to see like 440 as like a first target.
Yeah, that'd be really nice right under that 450 mark. With my next play, I'm looking at Apple in the short term, and Apple's been pretty crazy. On Friday, it actually sold off around market close in a pretty crazy way, got down to 207, and I'm going to keep looking at this one to the downside this week, and that might surprise people, right? Because Apple is usually a pretty good stock. It's like one of the powerhouses out there. I know that it has been a little weak if we actually go to the daily chart. It was weak a couple months ago, but it really roared back, and I'm looking for a pullback still in the short term and just a continuation down off of that price action from last week. If we go over to the book map, you can see that there's a pretty big support in the short term around 208. So if that breaks, I'll be watching for a push down to around 205 and then down to 200. But you can see 208 and 205 are pretty big supports coming up here in the short term on the book map. And there is a lot of sellers overhead. You can see the dark red with all the sellers lined up at these different spots overhead as well on Apple. So I'm definitely watching Apple down this week, Mike. It was a pretty negative week last week, and I'm just looking for a continuation off of that.
All right, sounds good. Well, it's now about that time for today's momentum plays. And with the first one, we have Chewy to the upside.
CHWI has been awesome in the short term. If it can re-break above 25.80 next week, look at it up.
All right, with the next one, we have SMH to the downside.
SMH, the semiconductor ETF, go ahead and watch it down below 262.50.
All right, and then with the last one, we have Meta for both directions.
Meta was a crazy one last week. It ended up falling on Friday, but overall pretty choppy. If it ends up falling under 492.50, then look at it down. Now, if it ends up re-breaking above 498, then watch it back to the upside.
Sounds great. So we have the upside level for potential move higher. We have the downside level for potential move lower. That's with Meta. Don't forget about SMH and the downside level there. And then Chewy and the upside level there. Regardless, these three stocks are on watch for potential momentum plays tomorrow. If and only if they break through the levels Tom listed, the stronger and more consistent the price action is, the better the setups become. So keep these three stocks on watch for tomorrow. And let's jump right into today's $500,000 big money trade. And we are looking at ticker symbol ELS. So looking at ticker symbol ELS, the big money on Friday put around $500,000 into the 60 strike call options that expire on August 16th of 2024. Looking at these options, they are already in the money as the stock is at, you could say, $64.34. These call options are the 60 strikes, so they're already in the money. They have all the way out until August, so these options are relatively high quality. At the same time, this stock is bouncing off of a pretty significant support level right around that $60 mark that goes back a couple years. So interesting setup here. I do like the risk reward. A stop loss can be set right under that like $60 area if you were planning to go through that method of trade management where profit taking can start all the way up to like that 72 to even like $74 area. So I definitely like the risk to reward, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it looks very interesting. I like that support a lot in the short term around 60. I'm glad you mentioned that one. It looks like it's holding it very well. And there's been a few of the big money plays recently, like ALNY, which we talked about earlier, that took a little while on support, but ended up coming up really, really well in the short term now. So I'm definitely going to keep my eyes on this big money play with ELS. It's a company that I haven't really heard of too much before this big money play, but I did find it to be very interesting, right? I like the setup on support, and the risk reward is really good, like you mentioned, and sometimes that's almost as important as catching the upside movement, right? Is having a decent setup on the trade. So I do like the setup here, and that gives the big money play a pretty good chance, in my opinion, here. And whenever you have a stop loss like that, Mike, it's just so awesome to have one right at such a key support like 60, because it's a nice whole dollar level, and it's a psychological level as well.
Absolutely. So good stuff there, and keep a close eye on this one going forward. But looking at the market right now, the good news is that there aren't too many like crazy events this week. We don't have a Powell speech. We don't have inflation data coming out or anything like that. So a lot of this week's trading will be price action based, and that's a good thing because sometimes when you have Powell speaking in the middle of the week, it can kind of like throw a wrench into things, right? But again, most of this week's action will be based off of just pure price action momentum and good old-fashioned trading. So going into this week, let's make sure to follow the money, have stop losses and respect them, and just trade in an overall disciplined way, and let's adapt to whatever the conditions make themselves out to be. We can see the market has been changing a little bit in the short term. We have been seeing a little bit more profit taking in the short term than we have in recent times, and I think a lot of that is tied into some of the way some of these big tech stocks are moving. Of course, you can look at stocks like Nvidia, and like on an intraday basis, you can see over the past 2 trading days, it has been pretty nasty. When you go to the high from Thursday in pre-market to the low of Friday, that's around a 12% move, which is bigger than we have seen. At the same time, even when you look at stocks like Apple, it had a lot of selling pressure coming not just over the past couple days, but even right before close on Friday. Again, this says something. So, let's remain adaptable to everything. Whether you're long on Nvidia and Apple and all these other stocks or you're short, it doesn't matter. You have to be willing to adapt to the price action and adjust to make sure that no matter what happens, you're going to be okay. So, again, let's deploy smart, long-term, sustainable trading habits this week. If you guys are new to the channel, consider demolishing that subscribe button to get our videos recommended to you more often. In every single video, we cover big money trades, important charts you won't find anywhere else, and everything that you need to know about in the market. It takes us hours to make these videos, and our goal is to have them all between like 20 to 25 minutes or less. So consider demolishing that subscribe button. And we also want to give a giant shout out to Reed in the Stocked Up trading floor. Thank you so much for being a great member of the community. So we just wanted to give you some recognition there, and we could see it's been a pretty exciting time in the Stocked Up community just by scrolling through the profits channel. So great stuff all around. If you guys are into short-term trading, check out that first link in the description and in the comments down below to get in on the Stocked Up trading floor. You get complete access to all of our custom trading bots. You can chat with Tom and myself all day long, access the multi-million-dollar big money trades before they're posted and talked about in these videos. We have phenomenal live events every single week, and honestly, if you're into short-term trading, the trading floor is the place to be. It'll be that first link in the description and the comments down below. But besides that, thank you all so much for watching, and let's crush it this week.